All right, welcome to TIL Talks with Chris White, where we talk TILs, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, and all advanced cell and gene therapies, both with patients and caregivers, along with industry leaders. Let's get going. As a reminder, I am not a medical professional or medical expert. I am only a professional and expert on my story and my experience. If you are needing or seeking medical advice or assistance, please reach out to your care team. All right, what's up? Welcome to TIL Talks. I'm Chris White. My guest today, Dr. John Powderly with Carolina Bio-Oncology and BioCytics. Super excited for today's recording, basically picking up where we left off from our last recording about a month or so ago. John, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Give us an update. What's going on?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. So I pulled some old slides and updated them about understanding cancer, staging, grading, how it's worked up, just so that new audience members to your channel that are newly diagnosed are trying to get the lay of the land. So I've got a lot of slides about that for teaching, and then also slides about understanding research trials, and specifically phase 1 research trials, which is our focus here. So it's just educational, and ask me questions as we go. I hope this is going to be interactive. And
Absolutely.
I love teaching here. So understanding cancer phase 1 clinical trials. So this slide reminds me that about 3 decades ago, they asked people, what are they most afraid of? It's a nuclear war, drought, floods, tsunamis. And always top of the list was cancer was what people are most afraid of. So that's how cancer got the bad nickname, public enemy number 1.
We're good.
The bad reputation of public enemy number 1. And on the right, this shows the recent 2023 statistics and trends for cancer, just to show that cancer is number 2,
right behind
heart cancer. But they're very close together as the number 1 and number 2. So it just kind of puts the lay of the land there, how common cancer is, as the lay of the land. Then a lot of patients might not know this, but cancer is considered a reportable disease. So by law, every cancer case has to be tracked. Why does that matter? Well, because if you live in a cluster where there's lots of cancer, it's going to draw attention to your neighborhood or your county or your zip code. And the Centers for Disease Control does track these cases, and they do look at the water and the toxins, and they do the industrial.
I hope so.
Or the pesticides or whatever, the smog. And you can, in your spare time, if anybody's interested, you can zoom in on your actual individual counties and zip codes and see what are the most common cancers and how do they relate. So it's just to remind patients that there's a lot of data out there if you want to learn about what our great taxpayer dollars are doing with the CDC to track those things.
Well, it also appears, those are definitely some of the most densely populated areas. So that does have some correlation, I would imagine, that goes with that.
Yeah, it'd be a confounding bias or variable, because if you think if people don't live in Nevada, you don't have cases at all, because they might die and never see a doctor. They're too rural.
Right.
And then really dense areas probably have more toxins and more doctors to diagnose them. So I noticed in our state, in North Carolina, the more west you go towards the beach, the more red it is with tobacco-related illnesses, because that's where all the tobacco factories are, and a tobacco state is out west. Out east rather, towards the beach. In the west, where it's more mountainous, not as much tobacco factories. So we do see some trends.
A lot of moonshine.
A lot of moonshine. Yeah, a lot of moonshine hospitalizations. Texas saw their amount of moonshine as well, where I trained. But yeah, just as a reminder, and then just the annual cases, just to show that cancer is on the rise globally on an annual case. There's now 19 million cancer incidence cases worldwide, and then projected by 2050, there'll be 35 million cancers, which is a 77% increase, 105 million patients living with cancer. It's just unfortunately so much cancer. And I'm sure people will stop smoking in these other countries. Heart disease will go down, but the cancer rates will continue to go up with all the other industrial toxins. So the next slide. And so just a reminder for patients, cancer starts as a mutation. Quite simple. From carcinogens, the best ones we know are smoke and radiation, ultraviolet light, sunburn. And then a lot of toxins. We're discovering every year more and more toxins in the environment and industry that have tendencies that can cause cancers in petri dish and in animals. So other countries define carcinogens at a much different lower threshold than America.
Right.
So that's kind of a worrisome thing here in the United States as well, that I don't think we're as strict as some other countries who ban a lot of our chemicals in the
Regulations.
regulations. Yeah. So and it starts in a single cell here. This is a great slide from cancer.gov, the NCI, just about how cancer starts, a single mutation on a chromosome. And then when you look right down, you can see the individual base pair, where just a single mutation that hits the right gene and it's a driver gene that can start cancer. So next slide. And the other interesting thing that a lot of cancer patients don't know is it might take 5 to 10 years for a cancer to actually develop. Even if you get a mutation that when it just starts from a normal tissue to hyperplasia, just that one mutation may not be enough to be full-blown cancer. But as multiple mutations begat more mutations, then a precancerous lesion becomes dysplastic. And then ultimately neoplastic or cancer itself. And you can see there how real the real definition of cancer is it's disorderly growth. It doesn't just stay in one place, huddled and nestled. It starts to break through the tissues into other nearby tissues, like through the basement membranes, and invade its surrounding structures. That's
And
really
we talked about this in previous recordings, but cancer is the uncontrollable division of cells that don't die. Like your cells are constantly rejuvenating, but they're supposed to rejuvenate and then die. But when they don't die, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah. In fact, some people, they don't realize that cancer, when it grows in a petri dish, it is immortalized. Like it will grow, and it can grow for decades and decades and decades. We still now have the original first cancer cultured at Johns Hopkins, Henrietta Lacks. There's a TV show about her. Her cancer still grows in a petri dish now, some 70 years later.
Wow.
When cancers can grow in the right broth and right culture, they become immortalized. So that's quite a powerful driver that will keep a cancer growing. So yeah, next slide. So when cancer grows, it starts to form a mass. And so on the left is a breast cancer cell dividing, and you can see the chromosomes are being pulled apart into two different cancer cells. And the green are different elements of the chromosome as is being pulled apart. On the right, the lump, as it has uncontrollable growth and proliferation, it'll form a lump or a mass. What really is, doctors can tell, is the masses are typically hard, like as you run your fingers over soft tissue. Cancers are typically hard like a pebble. And so even on, there's a lot of fat and there's, you feel a pebble, that's worrisome. Or if it's in a lymph node, should be nice and soft and squishy and movable. But if a lymph node becomes hard like a rock and enlarged and is immobile and doesn't really move around, or it's matted, those are clues that tell doctors that it looks worrisome.
Yeah, those are signs that you need to go get checked.
Yeah. So next is, and then the other thing about cancer is not just the cancer cells themselves dividing. Cancer cells recruit other cells that enable it to grow faster. Everything from the right type of inflammatory cells. Cancers like to hide in inflammation. So, and they also recruit their own fibroblasts, or we say cancer-associated fibroblasts, or other immune cells or dendritic cells that may enable them to grow and further hide from the immune systems. Although we like to say the immune system can attack cancer, very true, but many cancers know how to use the immune system to decorate their surface and to hide within inflammation. So that's a diabolical trick that cancers have. So that's the tumor microenvironment. And a lot of patients don't realize there's three main ways cancer will spread. The first is just directly into its neighbor, just directly invading the tissue into a neighboring organ. The other way is it'll drain into the lymph nodes, or it can invade the blood vessels and then spread to distant metastatic sites. So this slide from the inside just shows that you have a trail of lymph nodes in green going up to a metastatic tumor from the primary cancer, or it can invade directly into the blood vessels and travel through the blood system to create a metastasis.
Something I want to highlight real quick, John, is if you had to explain a lymph node to somebody that has no clue what it is, how would you say it in the most simplest terms possible?
Yeah. So lymph nodes they're part of the immune system, and they are little nests of the immune cells that are there to learn about the normal healthy cells in that tissue environment, or pathogens, like if you step on a thorn, or if there's abnormal cells, like cells infected with a virus, or even cancer cells. So lymph nodes are like little organs, they're a pea-sized part of the immune system that drains all the lymphatics that are basically where the cancer cells are recognized in those lymph nodes.
Would it be safe to say that they're essentially both your, I guess, security system, but also like your hygienically monitor of what to pass through, what not to, and if it
Kind of like,
does?
yeah, they're the gatekeepers in one
Yes,
sense. They're the
gatekeepers. Very
they're the
okay. That's what
gatekeepers,
I was looking for.
or like the thermostat of what our body tolerates as self, what we educate as self. So
Okay.
yeah, and on one of the prior talks we talked about the checkpoint blockades. Lymph nodes are very important to maintain balance of what we tolerate as self versus what we reject or attack as foreign. So in that sense, they're very important. They also is where all the immune cells they get educated, they will proliferate. Everybody has felt lymph nodes when they get a sore throat, and lymph nodes are sore, or your teeth
That's
clean.
why they always go in and
Arms are
feel in
always
like, hey, you know,
nodes here. Normal lymph nodes will swell for a week or so after inflammation, and that's a normal inflammatory response. But if
shows
lymph
that they're working.
grows, they're working. Yeah, that's exactly. If they keep growing after 2 or 3 weeks, or get really hard and sore, and don't shrink after 2 to 3 weeks, then a doctor needs to check.
Yeah, there's definitely a follow-up needed. Okay. I just wanted to highlight that and expand. Please
So
continue. All right. Thank you.
So next is a lot. Oh, one thing about the last slide. So sometimes cancers will, or patients will come and say, "Oh, they say, oh, well, my relatives had breast cancer and lung cancer and liver cancer and brain cancer." I'm like, I think that what they really mean is you always say that cancer is the type of where it started in its origin. Yeah. So that's
Yes.
another misconception a lot of patients have. So once you have a certain cancer and it spreads, we always call it that certain cancer
Metastatic.
that originated in, like breast cancer spread to the liver or the bones, not bone cancer and not liver cancer. So that's an important point. And you'd be
Yes.
surprised. I would say about half the patients that come to get a second and third opinion or a research trial opinion, they do not know their stage of their cancer. They don't know their grade of their cancer. They often don't know what are the common markers that might differentiate it from different subtypes
Yeah.
of cancer or the drivers. And so these are important points that I want your audience to understand so they'll be able to ask those questions of their doctor or look it up on their path report. So we stage cancer based on three main elements: tumor, node, and metastasis. So the so-called TNM staging. The T is how large is the tumor. In some organs, in some cancers, we measure just simply in millimeters or centimeters. Sometimes we measure how deep it has invaded. Like that's bladder cancer and colon cancer. We measure the T stage, the T of the TNM, on how deep it has invaded, not necessarily the size in centimeters, but how deep it has invaded. In other cancers, we actually look at the size. Like in breast cancer, we might measure it in centimeters, and the centimeters is what defines a T1, T2, or T3.
Okay.
In melanoma, some cancers are so dangerous that the T is measured in millimeters. And a melanoma is that good example. So millimeters, if the tumor is just more than 1, 2, 3 millimeters, that changes the T stage. So in this case here in bladder cancer, it's really how deep it's gone into the muscle wall of the organ, like the bladder or the colon. For the lymph node staging, it really depends on the number and how many lymph nodes there are nearby within the organ or nearby, like the center of the organ. So here, like within the lobe or within the whole lung. That's how they would stage those lymph nodes there.
Okay.
So that's really important because your T and M staging, and then the M stands for metastasis. If it has spread to distant organs, that makes you an M1. And pretty much all M1s are stage 4. Stage 1 is no lymph nodes. Stage 1 might be just only there in the early beginnings as it barely invades through the bladder or the colon. Whereas the other end of the spectrum is stage 4 as it is spread metastatic.
I mean, lymph nodes are essentially like the highway through your body.
The lymphatic drainage, yeah. So absolutely. So there's the blood vessels, which are under a good pressure and pumping blood, and you can feel the pulse. But in between all the cells, in between all the tissue, there is this very small thin void, the lymphatics, and it's where the non-blood flows, just very simple fluid, lymphatic fluid, and floats between all the cells and all the tissue. And that little void in there is where a lot of immune cells know how to come between the lymphatic channels and drain into the lymph nodes. So very important part of the immune system. So the staging for cancer is defined by the American Joint Commission on Cancer, and the surgeons, the American College of Surgeons, have defined all this. And every few years they update these staging manuals, which are important because they do define how we stage different cancers based on the TNM staging. And then there's clinical staging and pathologic staging. We say clinical staging is how big does it look on the scans or the imaging or what the doctors feel. And then there's pathologic staging, which is biopsy proof, right? So technically, we don't ever want to tell somebody they have cancer just by looking at a CAT scan, right? We
Yeah.
can say, it looks like it could be cancer. I think clinically it's a cancer. If it is clinically, it might be a stage 4 because it's metastasized to the liver. All that's clinical staging. But you can't really declare it as a true cancer until you get the biopsy.
Yeah,
And,
you
and
have
you
to be able to cross-check
protocol
that.
and yeah. So those are important points. A lot of patients don't even know to ask for the pathology report or to keep that on file. They don't remember the diagnosis date was when the needle went in. All these are simple questions.
Yeah,
Patients don't remember what was your diagnosis date? What's your anniversary? What stage were you? You know, and so this will help empower your listeners so to understand these.
absolutely.
So next is the grade. So the grade is different than the stage. Another common misconception. Patients will come and say, "Oh, I have stage, 3 cancer," and you're like, "No, you have a stage 1 cancer. That's a grade 3."
Yeah,
And that is such a difference. So really important to understand the grade versus the stage. And the grade is how aggressive it looks under the microscope. From the pathologist standpoint, under the microscope, does it look nice and orderly and well differentiated, meaning it looks like the tissue it should be, right? It looks almost like the exact tissue it started in. It just looks like colon. It's colon cancer, but it looks so much like colon. We say it's well differentiated or grade 1. Then the more aggressive and disorderly the cancer looks under the microscope based on the size of the nucleus or how the structure of the cells look, then it becomes more moderately differentiated and poorly differentiated. And then the most aggressive of all cancers are ones that have almost no pattern, no rhyme or reason. They just look ugly under the microscope, but we say they're undifferentiated. There's no structure at all, just completely fast growing. All the nucleus are open, and which is another sign it's growing fast. When the nucleus is real big, and we say the chromatin is open, those are clues that it's growing fast. So, and different treatments may depend upon the grade. For example, some cancers, if they're grade 1, it might only be hormone therapy or some other very targeted drugs that are for slow growing cancers. Whereas the higher grade cancers, grade 3 and 4, typically they need aggressive chemotherapy, and chemotherapy tends to work better in cancers that are fast growing. So I often see patients that only have a grade 1 or grade 2, and they've been on chemo for a year and the cancer is still growing. And they're like, why is the cancer still growing? That's because you have a slow growing cancer. It's grade 1 or grade 2. Oftentimes the chosen chemo regimen that is offered them is really designed for faster growing cancer. So they need to kind of recycle and go back to a different type of chemo. Some chemos are designed for slower growing cancers.
wanted to ask, for example, I was diagnosed stage 3C, and after I metastasized to stage 4, but when they say 3C, would like the C, for example, be like what the grade is? Because I've heard other people say like, oh, I was diagnosed 2A or vice versa, but is the
Yeah.
grade related to, I guess, what the alphabet would be like after the stage?
Usually the grade is given as a number, like grade 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Okay, so they won't refer to that as they're staging you.
Yeah. So some tumors, they break down the staging like TNM stage 3B, and that's like a stage within stage 3. That's a little bit worse than 3A.
Okay.
B will sometimes refer to many, many lymph nodes or
Okay.
bulky lymph nodes or lymph nodes that have spread across the organ from one side to the other, like the lung. If it goes from 3A, the lymph nodes are all on one side of the lung, to B, they're all on the other side of the lung. When they use the term C, I believe what they're referring to in that case are metastases that are in transit. So it would be where the tumor, a bulky tumor, it was large enough, but it hadn't spread distant, but it had spread to in the tissue in between and kind of climbing on its way to become metastatic, like direct extension metastasis.
Okay.
Maybe may have been what they refer to in that case. Sometimes you'll see a stage C is usually the closest you can get before you're stage 4. So it sounds like that was a very locally advanced, bulky, lots of
Yes.
nodes, and there was in transit metastasis that were on their way to starting to to become M1 or metastatic.
Okay. So it's not, I just wanted to kind of clarify that
Yeah, that's good.
the grade would not be correlated specifically with the stage. That's
Grade technically they're unrelated. Grade and stage are generally unrelated, just in a pure textbook way. This in practice, the pattern you see is when patients tell you their symptoms came on quick, I can say, oh, I bet that's it. That is probably a more aggressive stage, just because of how quickly their symptoms developed. So there is some clinical patterns that we just see happen. This is also kind of a sad but true. Younger patients tend to have more aggressive grade 4 cancers just by the nature of them being younger. Older
yeah.
patients, hormone-driven cancers, older patients that might be hormone breast or hormone prostate tend to have lower grade cancers. It's just a clinical pattern we see, but strict textbook is, stage and grade are supposed to be unrelated on how you define them under the microscope or
Okay.
on the surgeon path report. But clinically, we do see that they have some patterns.
There is some correlation, but okay, I got you.
Speaking of the C, in 3C, a common, we hear the term 3C a lot in ovarian cancer or a colon cancer, where the cancers have spread, especially ovarian cancer, where the cancers have spread to the peritoneum. So they haven't spread distantly, but they spread on the surface of the peritoneum. Sometimes that's referred to as a 3C ovarian cancer. So it's a common.
Yeah, I got you.
So this is a great reference article that explains what are the hallmarks of cancer. What is it in the biology of cancer that makes it different than a normal tissue? And you had the great point at the beginning. Oh, it's uncontrolled dividing cancer. It occupies space. It's a mass. All true. But as we start to break down within the biology, what are the actual enabling machinery of that cancer cell that make it grow and invade and spread? So in cancer biology, there's the lumpers and the splitters. These people have to put things in categories so we can know what's the machinery that I'm targeting. What are the genes that are associated with the immune system or evading growth suppressors or the plasticity, which is how cancers can kind of change their shape on the fly, resisting death, begatting more mutations, genome instability, never getting old, senescent cells, or evading death, apoptosis. So these are all categories of the genes and the machinery as a reference for patients who want to take a deep dive and look at some of those reference articles. But very interesting.
Absolutely.
And that's how we also, when we classify drugs, we try to classify them as to what are they actually targeting? Are they targeting the blood vessel? Here's one: inducing vasculature. Are they anti-angiogenesis? Are the drugs blocking off the blood supply? Okay, there's a class for that based on the machinery of how that cancer grows. So that's, or the signaling. There's a lot of like HER2 targeting breast cancer. That's a signaling pathway of a receptor on the surface. So HER2 and EGFR drugs are part of that signaling pathway. So we give them a target. We fit them into that target, so we can also orient ourselves as we look for druggable targets and do research and development. So next slide. So now let's talk about clinical trials and why this matters. So what's a clinical trial? The simplest way is a clinical trial is getting something different or potentially better than the commercial standard proven drugs that are approved and been around for 2 or 3 decades. So those drugs work. They're a sledgehammer. They get you out of a pain crisis. They're proven to work. That's the first to go to that literally every hospital system, every oncologist will go to. But oftentimes when patients run out of options, they're seeking something beyond the old-fashioned chemo that has worn off, or even the old-fashioned or some of the more recent drugs that have worn off. They're looking for other options on clinical trials. So we define clinical trials as prospective, not retrospective. Retrospective would be real-world evidence. We call it real-world evidence or real-world data. Prospective means we're going into the future and we're going to define how we're going to research something like cancer and cancer study drugs. So the NIH, the federal government, defines a trial as a prospective, biomedical, or behavioral. So even if you ask somebody's study behavioral, that's still research. Studies on human participants, which have to volunteer, so they're volunteers, designed to answer specific questions about biomedical or behavioral interventions, including new treatments. And this is examples such as novel vaccines or drugs, even dietary choices or dietary supplements. All those are trials, or medical devices. And known interventions that warrant further study and comparison. And generally, clinical trials, most of the trials that your patients will be in are clinical trials that generate data on dosage, safety, and efficacy. So it's a new drug, it's a study drug, it's a phase 1, 2, 3 study, and we'll go into that more. So that's the general outline of how we define a trial. If that makes sense.
I didn't know that there was such an extensive definition.
There has to be, because over the years, we've made all the mistakes of experimenting on people's behaviors.
No, it makes sense. Makes
Then
sense.
we had to expand the definition.
I mean,
Can't experiment on people with behaviors, and then you kind of slip by the federal government strict research on strict definitions of research for ethical review. Oh yeah, very good. So the next is, so why are cancer trials important for cancer patients? Well, our best current treatments today are based on the results of prior trials. So that's good.
100%.
And cancer patients are living longer because of clinical trials, right? And Chris, you're the perfect model patient for that. And so when you volunteer to participate in a trial, it saves lives of future patients. And hopefully it just might impact your own life, although we can't guarantee that or promise it in the trial. But that's the intent. There's a therapeutic intent that the study drug might just work and you might be among the first to benefit. So important points.
Very important.
So a couple other important points, and this is more for the people really taking a deep dive, is trials ethical or moral? And this goes back to, some college courses. Well, ethics is society's study of an individual's morality. Okay. So that means that, like, my daughter doesn't think, she loves dogs. She thinks we shouldn't experiment on dogs. That's her personal morality, that she would not want to experiment on dogs. I respect that. So we as a society have to respect people's individual personal morality judgments, right? But also as a society, which is ethics, is as a society, we understand as a society, we can experiment on animals, not just dogs, but all in between, so that we can learn to make human life better, but still not, still honor somebody's personal judgment that they don't believe in animal research, and they may not even want to believe in human research, of themselves, so we have to honor that. But that is the difference between ethics and morality. And this has a lot to do with the regulations around clinical trials. So that's an important point. The other important point for cancer patients is equipoise. So equipoise means that you have to be equally poised or equally uncertain as to whether or not a study drug works or doesn't work, because it would be unethical if I didn't give you a treatment that I knew it would work, right? So that would be so unethical. If I knew I had a proven treatment, i.e. like penicillin for syphilis, if I knew I had a penicillin for syphilis, but yet I just didn't want to give it to you because I want to study you as a natural history and see what happens to your syphilis as a research project, and the same goes with when you're trying to develop a new drug and you're comparing it to a predicate or a standard. You really should be genuinely uncertain as to which is better. Therefore, it's a fair, ethical.
That's what warrants the study.
Ask the question. So that's important. But by that same equipoise, the uncertainty principle, of which research relies upon, that uncertainty principle, that also leads to something called therapeutic misconception. And that is the patient's perspective. The patient say, well, golly, doc, I want the study drug because I think it's going to be better. Or I want the study drug because I want to get cured. And you have to say, wait a second, dear
That's
patient.
why we're studying it.
We don't know if it works. Dear patient.
Yeah.
Dear patient, you're teaching us. We don't know if it works. It might not work.
We're trying to figure that out.
It might actually cause you harm. It might actually cause side effects. That's why we're going to watch you like a hawk. So these are very, very important principles. And so where does the FDA really care about this is if we go around touting that a study drug works, or is gone to work or has therapeutic proof. So that's why there's a lot of other regulations out. We can't say a study drug is going to work. We can't say a study drug is proven to work. We can't make a promise. You can't promote a study drug, right? And so that's there. If you promote it, that means it has to be commercially approved and gone through all the trials, right? Before you can put it on TV and give it a brand name. So therein lies the equipoise. Now, this is another kind of a different angle of looking at therapeutic misconception. That would be a patient's viewpoint. But also in the phase 1 world, which is where I live, and the brand new drugs, Many of these drugs are highly targeted, right, to hit a very specific genomic mutation. And we know they worked in the petri dish, they worked in the mice, maybe the beagles and the monkeys. And so we know it made it through all that development. And it's very, very targeted to a very specific cancer gene with very good science. And the oncologists and the research field feel like it's very promising. And the patients drive in far distances to get access to this drug. And from the patient's point of view, we have to balance the therapeutic misconception. And at the same time, you get the insurance company saying, we're not going to pay for that CAT scan. We're not going to pay for that routine CAT scan, or not going to pay for something because it's purely experimental and therefore not worth driving. So there is a new term in the past decade or so that's come out. It's not therapeutic misconception, but therapeutic intent. And therapeutic intent means that we are offering this promising drug that targets a KRAS mutation only to cancer patients with that mutation, not to healthy volunteers without it, not to college students without it.
Yeah.
We're offering it to cancer patients with that mutation who've been on a wait list to get it. And so in reality, there is some therapeutic intent. Okay. So therein lies a little bit. So there's therapeutic misconception, actually probably, and therapeutic intent. So this, when I first
No, it's I mean, that's beautiful. I love the way you say that.
So, because the insurance companies had denied so many research trials, which that's the next slide deck we got.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah, the FDA and ASCO had to come out and put in all their guidelines. And we believe that phase 1 trials have therapeutic intent. Therefore, they are not purely research investigational. So there is therapeutic misconception, but the intent is that we hope it works. Everybody hope it works. The patient, the doctor, the research community.
Yeah.
These are important points. So next is beneficence. So beneficence means to maximize benefit, minimize harm. So dear patient, we are hoping the drug will help you, and we are going to do everything to be safe and hope that it helps you. And we also are going to try to minimize harm, which means, dear patient, you better never come to our clinic alone.
Please. Yeah.
You better bring a caregiver with you. You better make sure you check your daily sugar, your blood pressure, your temperature, your thermometer, your scale. So we know you are safe. And if our coordinators call you, you better pick up the phone. If there's a side effect you've been told, you better call us. You better not miss any point. So we are all over that for safety. So that's how we, as a research phase 1 clinic, we provide benefit. We satisfy this beneficence. We want to maximize benefit and minimize harm. The next is the autonomy. This is out of World War II, the horrific Nazi experiments. You have to have informed consent. And part of informed consent from patients is they have to understand it. Technically, the true definition of informed consent, patients to be able to understand it and repeat it back to you what they understand.
Yeah, that's
consent. To say, hey, what did I say?
It's a complicated, science, and you have to be able to take all that in and then be able to explain. Yes, I do understand what you're telling me. I understand the risk. I understand the benefits. I understand none of it is guaranteed.
Yeah.
And I'm signing the dotted line.
So, and with that informed consent, so the FDA likes to say the informed consent is not just a document, right? It's a process. When patients meet us and we say, hey, you've got your whole history, 2-hour visit, all the options, and we say, dear patient, I'm going to give you a stack of homework, right? I'm going to give you 3 research trial consents, so you can go home and read them. You don't have time to read them all here. I don't have a slot yet. You can take them home. And then you're going to review them with your family. You're going to review them with your doctor. You're going to have lots of questions. You write down all the questions. And then you're going to come back in a week and we're going to see which slots are about to open. And then you're going to tell me your questions and we're going to answer everything we can so that they are fully informed, have time to think about it, et cetera, et cetera. So there really has to be a 2-step process. They need time to think about it, digest.
Yeah, they're not being thrown on the spot or anything. Yeah.
So in cancer patients, especially cancer patients, there's something in here that they have to be, there's vulnerability. So the FDA defines who's vulnerable, who's more vulnerable than other people. Well, healthy volunteers are not that vulnerable. A stage 1 cancer patient's not that vulnerable. But the vulnerable are our children, pregnant women, those that can't defend themselves, like Alzheimer's, so they need extra protections. And then the terminally ill are vulnerable. So they need extra protection around the informed consent process. So by definition, all of our stage 4 patients seeking phase 1 studies, they're vulnerable. So we have to have extra guidelines around that because they're desperate, right? They will drive far away to try anything. We have to say, you need to think about this. You need to make sure you have the support and you understand everything before you enroll or consent. So justice is that the benefit and the burden of trials as a community are shared without bias. So what's an example of justice? The best example is when the AIDS drugs, HIV/AIDS drugs, were being developed in America. We would do the trials, American drug companies, to do the trials for HIV in poor countries with patients with AIDS. So we would, and of course, we honor, they volunteered for the trials, they enrolled in the trials, American drug companies. But yet, when the drugs got approved, commercially approved, the poor countries in Africa could not afford the expensive drugs. This was in the beginning for those, first few years. And so that would be an injustice, right? So that's an injustice. So if your community volunteers to participate, then your community should be able to afford and get access to the fruits of the research.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is very important. And that was addressed and fixed, but that was one of the things that was touted in the early days about injustice.
Well, yeah, it's like, how can you use us for the study, but then not use us for, the actual result for the benefit? I mean, like, that's where a patient feels like they're, would be used. And that's where we're trying to overcome the stipulation or the conceptions, I guess, of clinical trials.
And there are conflicts of interest, and that is that the FDA is make sure that the doctors doing the trials have big financial disclosures. We have to report, when we're publishing about all the disclosures. We even have to get a special license called a 1572, a form 1572 that has big financial disclosures, so that we are not biased in or have any heavy conflict that would sway us one way or the other. So the presence of conflict of interest is a matter of, it might be a fact or a statement that there are many conflicts, but it's behavior and how it has to be disclosed and monitored. That's the most important thing about conflicts of interest. So, but I have a whole slide deck on that another day. So, and then next slides here, let's see, we're going here next, is the evolution of human subject research. And I'll just go through this, but this is very interesting. And so even before the Nazi physicians in the 1930s, America, which led the charge on this, America led the way for sterilizations, castrations. If you were a criminal, they would castrate you. If you were, developmentally delayed or, mentally retarded was the old terms, they would have sterilizations or euthanasia. Unfortunately, in America, there was some euthanasias were touted in the 1930s. And that some of that, unfortunately, eugenics, that was some in America, some of that talk led to some of the Nazis or Nazi physician practices, unfortunately. In the 1950s here in America, believe it or not, the frontal lobotomies, talk about vulnerable patients with, who are crazy with schizophrenia. They would just put a drill in a drill and then pass a wire kind of loosely over the brain, and just through those drill holes, they'll pull the wire taut and get a frontal lobotomy. And that was a very effective treatment for severe schizophrenia. They become kind of numb and lose their personality or their craziness. But that won the Nobel Prize in the 1950s. But all that was done without consent, no informed consent process. Well, yeah, it's a welcome trip through history here. Then in the 1960s, thalidomide was one of the best-selling sleeping pills in Germany, but they never really did enough research on thalidomide to understand that it might have side effects. But it was a great drug. It treated pregnant women's nausea and got them to sleep, and was made in America and given to tens and tens of thousands of pregnant women. And you may remember the reports, but very, very many people about my age, about right around our age, late 50s, were born with seal arms, no arms and no legs. So the thalidomide cut off the blood supply and the growth of arms and legs. So all over the world. So because of that thalidomide catastrophe, there were a lot of like regulatory agencies that began. The FDA started because of that. So a lot of the globe said, okay, we need an FDA in every country to look at drugs, define what is a study drug, define the process, informed consent, all those regulatory things and how the countries report side effects to each other. All that has become because of these thalidomide catastrophes.
So was the FDA formed in 1962? Is that correct then?
Yeah, late, right around this time, right after. It probably was in the ideas were being formed, but it was the thalidomide that put it over the thalidomide was like, never again. Never are we going to have a whole generation of seal babies with no arms and limbs. So I remember some of my classmates in junior high school had no arms, right about my age. Then there were experiments in schools where some children were infected with hepatitis to see what would happen. Horrific, terrible, but some school, I forgot where Willowbrook is, I think somewhere in the Northeast. And then in San Antonio, 1870s, even after the FDA.
And there was no legal law about informed consent or consent at all at this time, right?
There was informed consent that it should be done, but they didn't fully define what is an ethical review of an informed consent.
Okay.
And then was it for diseases only? In 1972, there was Tuskegee, I think it's in Alabama, the Tuskegee Airmen, the famous, World War II air vets. That town, Tuskegee or county, they had a group of older men who had syphilis and they just were never treated. Somebody, I don't just because they didn't seek doctors, but then a researcher at an academic center somewhere in Alabama went to go study them and followed them for a few years and took pictures of how they got syphilis bone lesions. And it even got published in like a pretty big journal. And then once it got published, there was outrage. There was like, wait a second. And then all through the 90s, there were a lot of Cold War radiation experiments, some of them on, I don't even want to know, but there were experiments that probably never should have been done. I have to go back in the literature.
No, 100%.
On either jailed patients or the developmental aid. There also were, out of Nazi Germany, a lot of nerve mapping conduction studies were performed on vulnerable concentration camps, and they mapped a lot of the nervous system. And those were difficult things for the medical literature to reconcile they mapped all these nerves and the spinal cord, but they were done on horrific experiments. So the research community and the medical community has had to grapple with all these. So those are the abuses. That's worth a 3 credit hour course alone, like just on that. So the protections is, as those years, you can see, the Nuremberg Code was voluntary competence. The FDA was from thalidomide catastrophe. Helsinki was really nailing down what is informed consent as a process. National Research Act was more definitions of how we protect humans. The Belmont Report, respect, benevolence, justice. So all those are different steps. And then come along 1990, I put in here just to have to joke. The 1990, the Department of Defense said, okay, wait a second, we're the federal government. We believe in all those things. Of course we do. But we're going to make an exception. The exception is, if you are in the military, we're going to experiment on you anyways.
And you don't have a say.
We're going to have
That's what, when you sign up, like,
well, hyperbarics, taking planes to 3 and 4G, below the sea level, living in hyperbaric chambers, all these. So those are technically, by definition, experiments, and giving like vaccines. The famous one was anthrax vaccines. There was a big scare. You don't have a choice. There's a big scare before, like, I think the Saudi or the Middle Eastern wars. There were concerns about anthrax, and we're just gonna vaccinate the military. The vaccine was research. It was a research study vaccine. We're gonna vaccinate the troops.
And we're talking like the early Gulf Wars, right? Like the
early Gulf
late
Wars.
80s, early 90s. Okay. Yeah.
So right around that time frame. So just to show you that we come a long way, but then we can peel it back if we're based on. So yeah, very interesting. So patient protection. So the informed consent, the document that when patients sign, you had to do an informed consent for your TIL.
38 pages.
Bingo. That's where, they start like more than 20.
Read it. I almost have it memorized, man.
They have to be at a 6th grade reading level. Yep. They have to declare all your rights. They have to understand your diagnosis, treatment options, alternatives, risks and benefits. Everything has to be fully written out. Voluntary, you can withdraw at any time. There's no penalty. Your docs are still going to be your docs. They're going to take good care of you. Even if you decline, explain all the parts of the study.
That's everything that,
How many EKGs, how many days on the
every one of those bullets.
Description of all the biopsy procedures, how we're going to maintain your confidentiality, how we're going to compensate if you get, or if there's going to be, treatment to make sure you don't get forgotten about if there's an injury or toxicity, and who's the contact person.
They cover every basis that you could think of is covered in that consent.
So even like on our consent forms, it's got our main dial number, write down how to get our cell phones after hours. In the IRB, the ethics review boards will sometimes call it a test that we're picking up the phone at.
Well, I mean, and I signed mine in 2019. I don't know how I even had to sign one since, but I know that they've changed.
Yeah. If the protocol gets
more detail.
you have to re-sign if there's an amendment to the protocol or new
Yep.
safety things come out.
Yep.
So yeah, very good. So next here, let me go to the next slide here. So how are patients' rights protected? So the study drug in all its pathway of the mechanisms of how it's engineered and designed, all that has to go through scientific review. So the scientists at the drug company must review, and at the research site have to review that, yes, this is plausible, this makes sense. It looked like it was safe in the mice and in the monkeys and in the vitro data. So has to get through a pretty solid scientific review just to get into an FDA phase 1. Once it gets into the phase 1 and then is FDA approved for research only in a phase 1 at a research site, it goes through ethical review or in Europe, they call it ethical review boards. In America, we call it institutional review boards or IRBs. Yeah.
Isn't IRB also independent review board?
Yes, now they can be called that. It used to be that it was institutional, meaning at your institution.
Okay, so that's where it originated from, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Originated from, and actually that's a good thing. Now it kind of means also independent.
Okay. I've always seen it and been referred to as independent review boards.
So yeah, sure.
That's actually the first time I've heard it as institutional.
This is before there was like these independent review boards that were just all digitized and efficient, and like the review boards that we use now are all digital and they only focus on cancer, only phase 1, only cancer. And so it's very, very specific to experts. So if you go to the institution, like the hospital institution, the review board might be a bit slower, paper-based and more broad, but now there are more focused independent review boards.
And having that word independent in it shows that there is no, there's less opportunity or chance for bias.
Yep. That's right. Very right. Very correct.
So,
yeah, that's a good point. There's been institutions, great academic institutions, that they let their bias kind of slip in and they did things that were a little bit risky and then they got in trouble.
yeah.
So, yeah, good point. So the ethical review boards are required for any trials that are federally funded. Really, it's all trials, or any trials that are subject to FDA regulation, which is all trials. The other term for the independent review boards are called centralized IRBs. This is kind of the other we call them, because they're not at the institution. They're not the local hospital. They're digitized, for like a network of research.
There's like multi-sites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on those review boards, and this would be a good job for you one day, Chris, is they want people that are survivors or, patients or clergy or social workers to represent the community. So especially since you're more engaged in researching what's going on, a lot of those centralized IRBs, they're pretty busy and they're big. I can give you some leads later. So they want non-medical board members to be involved in vote.
I'm definitely involved in that sort of thing. I'm a grant reviewer for a handful of different organizations, on some steering committees.
Yeah.
100%. Yes, sir.
I'll give you some leads on that at Deloitte, the IRPs.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And then once the trial is open and accruing, generally the IRB generally doesn't look at like all the data in real time. However, these data and safety monitoring boards, DSMB, or data safety monitoring committees, they call them sometimes, they are checking the ongoing trial data as it's coming in. Like, every batch of like the next 10 patients, they look and see what are the side effects. And they had meetings and the investigators have to vote. Can we go to the next level, or we have to cut the dose down? So that makes sure that the risks are minimized kind of in real time with the study, and that the data is showing a clear signal or not. And we have the investigators can say, hey, stop the study. Dear drug company, we don't care if it's a $20 million drug. We don't care if it looked great in the mice, but it's not looking safe in the human. And therefore, we either won't dose increase, or we have to say it's this drug, just stop, just go back. And
sometimes you got to just hit the pause button.
Yeah. Sometimes go back and just try the next version. You just start over with don't give up on the class or the target, but just make a different molecule. And that happens. That's part of my job is to do that. And that's how we earn good trust, because we're fair brokers on what's safe and when not to do something again. So the next slide. So that's part of the Data Safety Monitoring Review Board. Then there are government oversight and safeguards once the study's going on. There's more monitoring. There is the Office of Human Resource Protection, which is federal government, making sure that the ethics are being followed. And this OHRP at any time can come and audit your site, or research site, or a drug company to make sure we're following all the ethics. Just like the FDA can come audit a blood bank or a manufacturing, they can audit them we can be audited for research protections. And to make sure we're following FDA regulations, this just lists them out just for reference. And even
Yeah.
NCI has their own research program for early phase drugs as they send out to sites. So this is just good teaching and reference for your audience. So next slide here. Let's see here. We go down here to the next one. So the benefits of being on a clinical trial are patients will at a minimum receive the best standard treatment. So we as a research trial site in the good clinical practices, we would never deny a patient a proven standard. So that if they're at their hospital system, that's the standard of care. That is, the proven best standard. Doctors would never deny that to a patient as a principle in good clinical practice. However, over the last couple of years, some things have happened in the research ethics and the IRBs and in the FDA because of the Right to Try Act. And this is where some patients, a lot of these are depend upon different scenarios, but some patients, they were diagnosed with cancer, but they feel as healthy as a horse.
But they have no idea.
They said, oh my God, my cancer was incidentally discovered. I just had a routine, scan, or they discovered this incidentally. And I have a cancer, pancreatic cancer that spread to my liver, but they're as healthy as a horse. And they're looking at, oh my God, pancreatic cancer is so deadly, poor prognosis. And then they're looking at, what is the standard first line treatment for pancreatic cancer? Oh, well, it's a quadruplet of 1980s chemotherapy.
Yeah.
FOLFIRINOX, and they're looking at the side effects of FOLFIRINOX, and the cancer space saying, wait a second, I feel great. I don't want all those chemotherapy side effects.
Yeah.
I got to go to a wedding.
5-decade-old,
and I got a life to live. I'm not ready for that yet. And I have no cancer symptoms. So they feel like they're trapped, that the cancer patient feels like, well, wait a second. Of course I want to treat my cancer. Of course I want to fight it. Of course I want to do something. But they're going and getting second and third opinions, and all the standard treatment options is
considering the quality of life.
Bingo. So with the Right to Try, and with the FDA being a little more progressive, thank you, and with the IRB also allowing some of these more recent protocol languages, they're putting in language even into phase 1 studies for immunotherapy, like, our day-to-day. They're saying patients may, as long as they know the alternative and they're aware of it and their local doctor agrees that, yeah, they can skip or decline or delay standard chemo, right? They then can choose access to a trial. I put immunotherapy just because we like immunotherapy, but it could be any trial, pill study, targeted drug. But that's pretty modern of recent. Like, that's just in the past 1 or 2 years. So that we're seeing that language. And that is really exciting for the patient community, that if they don't want to go get FOLFIRINOX, or certainly don't have to get 6 cycles of it, they could say maybe just on 1 cycle or 2 cycles, or just delayed until they're ready to do that choice, and while they look around for other trial options. That's an option. Now that is a federally regulated, legit option. based on recent past year or two.
Essentially, they got to let them know, like, hey, here's some Band-Aids you can use as a bridge therapy.
Yeah. But when we see patients that say they've been to 3 oncologists and they denied chemotherapy 3 times, and then they come to us and they're in pain. I'm going to say, listen, if you're in pain, I'm not going to experiment on you in pain. Go back and you get it shrunk. Or another example we've seen here is a good one is somebody with prostate cancer, and they're nervous. They don't want hormonal therapy. And it's a stage 4, but he's got bone metastasis everywhere. He doesn't have pain, but he's got bone mets everywhere. And his PSA is going up exponentially. And it's like, I just don't want the hormone therapy. I don't want the hormone therapy. And
because that could wreak havoc.
Yeah. Hormone therapy does have some side effects, but the hormone therapy in prostate cancer, newly diagnosed prostate cancer, if your PSA is hundreds and hundreds, hormone therapy can put that into a near remission for a couple years. So that's where, like, I would, as a good doctor, say, listen, man, I hear you. I wouldn't want chemotherapy. And I know hormone therapy might sound bad, but the benefit of you getting hormone therapy, this cancer is your PSA of 300, first hormone therapy, it can go down to 3. And that is the good advice that I would give a prostate cancer patient, because, and then I'll say, listen, as soon as the hormone therapy fails, you come to me first. But right now you deserve a near remission. You deserve to have complete control of that cancer. Because I know if I give you immunotherapy when your prostate cancer is exponentially growing and hormone therapy works like a charm, I'm not doing you any favors. That wouldn't be ethical.
Delaying. Yeah.
but a quadruple, chemo for pancreatic cancer. Assuming they're not in pain, I would offer them immunotherapy if they wanted it. So next is if the new approach is proven to work, patients may be among the first to benefit, which is true. We can't promise it works, but you might be among the first to benefit. Also, let you play an active role in your own healthcare. Check.
100%.
That patients have a chance to help others and improve the cancer care if it works, and help others if it works. And they also share the burden of cancer kind of as an altruistic gift. They just have that altruistic, mode that, yeah, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna go down trying, take a swing at the bat, and I'm gonna try to help people and donate.
Absolutely. That was my mindset. That
Yeah.
was always my mindset.
So, and then the other good thing I like this is it's a chance of hope when you're faced with cancer. Because, we tell patients we don't run out of options. There's always these phase 1 drug sponsors are always coming, rapid fire, different options. So there's always hope. If you're strong enough to make it to the clinic, we will offer you some options. So
And
that is the benefits.
I don't know how many, I'd have to go back and count, but I have numerous guests that have come on TIL Talks and that are phase 1 clinical trial patients that are about a dozen or close to a dozen years out after doing a phase 1 clinical trial that had the same prognosis that I had or similar to it that saved their life. I mean, I had everything backwards in my mindset about what a clinical trial was. And knowing obviously what I know now, I mean, I would have been asking immediately, like, hey, like, I mean, I can only imagine how many different phase 1 trials I qualified for at the time, 2018, 2019. But
Yeah.
to your point, I mean, man.
So the next is what are the risks of a trial? Well, known side effects, like in our case, autoimmune toxicity. We talked about the itises here many times.
Yeah.
Antibody
Oh,
drug
yeah.
it's these new class ADCs are very promising, but they have some nuanced side effects as well. Tear ducts, pneumonitis or colitis sometimes, low blood counts, very nuanced side effects or other unknown side effects. So any complaint the patient has, we got to work it up. We got to figure it out. And lots of EKGs, all kinds of blood monitoring, every organ system. And then there's the risk it just doesn't work and you wasted your time, or you got a bad side effect and it didn't work and you wasted your time. And then that's a triple negative. So those are realities that could happen. So next is what about recruitment? So this is interesting. So clinical trial recruitment, we can't call it marketing, you can't really market for a trial. If you market for a trial as if you're promoting a trial, that is a no-no to the FDA. You have to go under the banner that you are recruiting using ethical research standards, which means you can raise awareness about the trial. You can provide a link to clinicaltrials.gov. You can say we have trials for prostate cancer or pancreatic cancer for those interested, but we can't use verbiage that will entice them or make them think it works or that it's free. Like these are no-nos. So like this is a good example of this trial that opened up in California. This actually is a true story. A trial opened up in California, and this was the ad in the papers. It was like a new hospital
Medical
system. They got a new high fandangled research doc who was going to open up all these trials, and they put a big ad, and they said medical center researchers seek participant in gene therapy in radiofrequency clinical trials. If you are suffering from colon cancer with liver metastasis, you may be eligible. New medication is free to participants. Sounds pretty
like
blank.
is that brachytherapy?
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, could have been, or ablation therapy. So
Yeah.
that ad right there sounds bland. But when the FDA and the IRB saw that in the human subject research
They
protections,
start reading between the lines.
they overinterpreted it, but they did make an example of the medical center that kind of closed them down for a year and said, everybody go redo training about ethical research. They didn't like the word new treatment. That was a big no-no because remember, therapeutic misconception. It's not a treatment yet.
Yeah.
Therapeutic intent. It's not true. It's unproven. It should have been an experimental study.
Well, yeah.
Seeking, like the word seek was like, oh, we're seeking you. And they didn't like the word gene therapy because it has the word therapy in it.
Right.
And then it was enticing them. If you are suffering, you may be eligible. And they didn't like the word free because that's like promoting that it's free. So
Yeah, it won't cost you nothing.
so this
It costs you
bland,
everything.
yeah, this bland ad in a California hospital system shut down their research program.
Got eyes going everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So just to show you, so even the recruitment of patients, we have to be very parsed with our
Man.
words. Even as I explained to you, it's educational. We're learning. It's highly experimental. So these are the types of trials. I listed as many as I could today. So observational trial is non-interventional, like you're just following people in cohorts, just observing them and following them through the life of their trial, asking them questions about it and how do they feel. And that's a trial. You're collecting data. If you're collecting data in an organized way, that's a trial. Next is like prevention trials. Are you going to get a colonoscopy or a stool test? That's an intervention of a test, and colonoscopy is an intervention. Looking at the difference, screening studies, right? Like there's now multi-cancer early detection screening studies like blood work, exciting and promising, but we can't promise anybody they work. We don't know, so we have to follow those patients who have a positive signal on a test very carefully. We don't really know it works. Does it really detect cancer? Do we have to go getting biopsies everywhere or just repeat the test and repeat imaging? So these are things that are still in play in the research field. Studying people's genome, that's a trial. New diagnostic tests, new devices for diagnostics. Biobanking, we do a lot of biobanking. Everybody that comes in our clinic, we offer them a biobanking trial so we can learn from their blood and their tumor biopsies and their archive block.
And that's something I'm very passionate about highlighting is if you have the opportunity to do so, always do it if and where you can. Like,
So we got a 12-page consent form for that, just to get permission for your old archive block or
that's
piggyback
very important.
extra tubes of blood. And we link all that to the genes or the clinical data. Then there's interventional trials, which would be like a phase 1 or 2 trial where it's a study drug, device trials, quality of life trials, supportive care trials, tumor registry. This is a new one now. Sometimes I think some societies or advocacy groups are doing this, or like collect anybody that gets cancer, enroll in our registry so that if your cancer relapses or there's a new drug that's being developed, we want to be able to contact you and then
There's other.
match you into trial. And if it matches you into trial, we want to follow how you're doing to see if their program works. So are these registries, and these are often with a biobanking trial. Then there are more modern trials where they're looking at trials for individual patients, right? You would call them adaptive or platform trials, really looking at can we sequence genes to silence genes? Or in our case, can we make cells just for you with your own cells? Those would be platform trials. And even if we want to ask patients, dear patient, we want to learn about how much are you willing to pay or how far are you willing to travel for a research trial or cost incurred? What if somebody had to manufacture cells just for you? What are your thoughts about that? We want to understand for research. And that needs an IRB approval for that, for those questions. So next is treatment trials for cancer patients, test safety and effectiveness. Placebos are rarely used in cancer treatments. I would almost say now they're almost never. Very few. It's hard to randomize a patient to a placebo trial in America, anywhere in the world, really.
So I do a lot of grant reviews, and
they're just very hard. Yeah, just very, very hard. If they are used, usually this is the old standard and probably never these days, but they're used when there is no standard treatment. There's a few cancers where once you remove it, there's no standard treatment. You just watch it. So a placebo might be a good in that indication where if there's no treatment after it's removed, but they're trying to compare it to a true treatment, a true new drug. And that the only way to really make that blinded might be to do a placebo in that specific indication. The treatment should be non-toxic if you're going to do that, so you don't get fooled. Because if the patient has the toxicity of the study drug, then
yeah,
of course they got the study drug, not the placebo. And then if you are going to do that, patients have to be told that there is a placebo component. Now, the good news is placebos are never used in place of an effective treatment. And I'm going to find out placebos are never used in phase 1 trials. So that's another thing for our clinic. They never happen because the purpose is dose escalation.
Exactly.
Next is the protocol. Patients don't typically see the full protocol. I mean, if they want to do, I would share it with them. But this is what the doctors follow, very detailed about why and how the drug is being developed and the background about the biology, the science, the strict guidelines, the proposal of the study, how many people are going to be participating, who's eligible, how the study will be carried out, what information is going to be gathered, the endpoints. It ensures that all the trial procedures are consistently carried out. That's what the FDA looks at in the IRB. Trial designs focus on eligibility to make the groups even, and their endpoints are like the objectives, the primary, secondary objectives, usually survival and or response rate. Does the tumor shrink? When does it relapse? And then is the study drug tolerable, and what's your quality of life? So there's some standard things. Trial designs, this is really kind of very basic. We don't randomize. So these are old slides about randomization is like a flip of the coin, which
Right.
we rarely do anymore with a placebo. But we might flip a coin between a study drug and a chemotherapy, or a chemotherapy plus study drug versus a chemotherapy without study drug. That would be randomized in a phase 3 global trial. You're still getting the proven standard chemo, but it's plus or minus a study drug on top of that. And a double blinded means that neither the physician nor the patient know. Those are a little more complicated, and they require a bigger site to really have dedicated people to randomize, be blinded, and break codes. A lot of the vaccine studies were blinded. When I did my COVID vaccine study, I was in the blinded. It was a blinded study. We got a vial, but it was a vial with a number on it. We didn't know if we were getting the vaccine or not. So for vaccine studies, COVID, that was a randomized double-blinded study that I participated in because I wanted access to the drug. I didn't care if it was 50%. I wanted access to the vaccine.
Right. Something's better than nothing, right?
Yeah. So then this is how we differentiate the different phases of studies. So phase 1, it's down there at the bottom, you say the new molecular entity, a new study drug starts as a drug in a petri dish, then it goes into a mouse. Takes 3 to 4 years of preclinical development. That costs between $15 to $100 million just to get through preclinical development. Then it is defined as a new molecular entity. That's the verbiage. And it gets a study drug number. Usually it's the initials of the drug company and whatever number the drug is in the pipeline of the drug company. It doesn't make much sense. So they're basically a number. We, as a research clinic, when it comes to us and it's just a number with some initials, we have to give it a nickname based on who's the sponsor and what's the target. That's how we orient ourselves. Like what sponsor, what target. So we orient ourselves around that. But once it gets approved by the FDA for research, based on an IND or investigational new drug application, it enters into a phase 1 clinic. That's where we come in, right there at that red arrow, right at the beginning of the phase 1. Phase 1s are small studies, like 15 to 20 patients. Sometimes now maybe phase 1 and 2s are blended together to make it easier. They'll roll right into a phase 2, and we might have a study that's like 80 patients, usually at only a handful of research sites.
Rarely see a phase 1 trial that's into 3 digits.
Yeah,
for
they're
patient
very,
enrollment.
they are trying to figure out those things, the safety, as we escalate the dose, is it tolerable? What's the highest dose we can go? So we have to be ready for a side effect. If it's too high or too much side effect, we've got to titrate it down and then declare that is the maximal tolerated dose, or what we used to say the phase 2 dose. Then they're
After all
measuring
that, then you can go to phase 2.
Then you can go to phase 2. In these days, studies, phase 1s are rolling right into phase 2 in the same trial to make it even more efficient. And they're looking at what's called the pharmacokinetics, ADME, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Is the drug excreted in the urine or stool or sweat? How's it distributed? Where does it go? Does it hit the target? Is it in the tumor? So we biopsy the tumor. And then all the side effects are very classified. So a phase 1 study might last 2 years. In the phase 3, another 2 years. If you combine them together, maybe 3.5 years combined phase 1, 2, if you get really good sites and are very efficient. And then after that, when the drug company has kind of made a decision, is the drug worthy that it works? It's tolerable and it looks like it's got a future? Then they start spending a lot of money and bring it to phase 3 and they go global. And that's where the costs, you see the costs go up, not just like, 10 to, $70 million. The costs go up in the billions of dollars. And that's where they may randomize it versus standard of care. Even though we don't like randomization, still on a global scale, most regulatory agencies, including the FDA, they like randomization with hundreds and hundreds of patients. Now, what I think is ethical, if you're going to randomize patients, I think it's ethical that if they progress, you unblind them.
Right.
And you give, I think, the justice and the dignity and the respect that if you unblind them and they are in the chemo arm, or they progress on the chemo and they know they're on the chemo because they have all the chemo side effects.
They have the right to cross over.
Bingo, they should have the right to cross over. And so now in modern phase 3 drugs, we are seeing that that great thing of the crossover, which we like that. As soon as you progress, you can cross over. The other things is we're seeing these randomizations, which are weighted in favor of the study drug, like 1 to 2 randomization. So not where it's 50-50. It's like, oh, 2/3 of a chance you're going to get the study drug, but it might be at 2 different doses of the study drug. And then 1/3 of a chance you get the old fashioned chemo, and you can cross over to both. So we're seeing more prospective trials like that. And then once it gets through the phase 3 study and is proven to work against standard of care, it'll get a license, a biologic license application. And then it can then go into commercial production and get an advertisement on TV or in the newspapers or at the big meetings.
Right.
That it's
I mean,
approved.
I know it's not on this, slide right here, and maybe we could, go into this on another conversation, but accelerated approval,
Yeah.
that's, the treatment that saved my life was through an accelerated approval, and it was a phase 2 study. And it's commercially available, but there's the confirmatory trial going on right now, which is is considered the phase 3 trial that's got hundreds of people. It's globally,
Yeah.
make sure it
That's
all
a
works,
good
but
way to do it. So the FDA, in a very
there's a
progressive
lot of
way,
that going on.
they have moved, like they're not waiting for a complete commercial approval based on 2 randomized phase 3s, which is what they used to do. They're now saying if you have a good randomized phase 2 or a small phase 3 that looks like it's going to meet its endpoints, they may give you a preliminary approval contingent upon further verification of safety and long-term efficacy, where you still have to keep the trial going in other places. The only thing is that is good. The only issue with that is sometimes if they open it up globally into other places and other trials, but yet they're randomizing those other places to TIL or no TIL in your example, is that justice to those other places? That's just where it becomes a
Yeah,
little bit like, okay, well, how
that's
come
a good point.
somebody in a poor country, how are they getting randomized to not get TIL or to get only the checkpoints, whereas this rich American who can get it till next week? So
That's a very good point.
is that justice? Now you can rationalize all different ways because they don't have that many TIL manufacturing facilities. They don't have insurance to pay for it. So this is the only way we can get TIL into this country. Fine. So those are issues that we still kind of grapple with. I think another issue about this, which I don't like, this is a real bad example, but is the case. Many, many years ago, at some presentations at professional societies and some drug reps have come to my clinic and will show me a really great survival curve. And the survival curve is so wide of like the study drug versus the standard of care. Then when you look at the months at the bottom, you're like, oh, wait a second, the drug is so effective, but yet you learned it was so effective like 3 or 4 years ago. And it looks like it looks like they didn't cross over, or they didn't stop the study and just say it's effective. So the survival curve looks great. It's very convincing, but I'm like, I just don't like survival curves that look that good because that means the standard of care group didn't cross over, didn't get access. And so that's an issue. And I will often call
Yeah.
that out. I like calling that out. The other issue too is when sometimes at some academic centers they'll have a investigator-initiated trial or the shifting standards of care. So the shifting standards of care, whereas the drug might be approved for prostate cancer, or another, this may be a better example. The drug's approved for colon cancer, commercially approved, on TV, it works in colon cancer. And there's some early phase 1B, phase 2 data that it might work in pancreatic cancer, okay? But it's not yet commercially approved for pancreatic cancer. So then there is like a shift of when does it become the standard in pancreatic? Is it when the phase 2 completes and then just people give it off label? Or is it when the FDA approves it for pancreatic cancer? Because that might be another 2 years. So there is a period in there where if a university or a research network is still randomizing people to get between the drug that could work in the prostate or in the colon that works the pancreatic, if they're randomizing them, but yet they're also touting that, 4 other academic centers have shown it does work. So if 4th academic center shows it works, and now at ASCO there was 3 or 4 abstracts that shows it does work, all phase 2, I think you should stop your academic study at your center and just declare that it can work in pancreatic cancer and just start adopting that as your institutional standard of care, and just
Oh,
fight the insurance companies to try to get it covered off label. So these are other issues that we grapple with. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, but anyways, let's do this. This is a good stopping slide.
Okay.
And then, the next week or two when we meet again, we'll keep rolling because I have a lot of these good teaching slides.
Man, I'm real stoked to pick up where we're leaving off right here. I mean, so much to expand upon.
Yeah, this is good. All
This
right,
is very good.
well, Chris, I'll roll here. So we'll see you at Deloitte. And good luck, and thank you again for hosting me.
Yeah, 100%. And for everybody, sending love. Peace.
All right, that concludes today's episode of TIL Talks with Chris White as we talk TILs, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, and all advanced cell and gene therapies. As a reminder, I am not a medical professional or medical expert. I am only a professional and expert on my story and my experience. If you are needing or seeking medical advice or assistance, please reach out to your care team. I'd like to thank my guest today for joining me on TIL Talks. To our listeners who have not yet done so already, please follow, comment, subscribe, share, and smash that like button. For more information about TIL Talks and related resources, please visit www.tiltalks.com. I'm Chris White. As always, sending love to everybody. Peace.